Amidst a million stars, I stand alone and wonder how much life and love there was tonight. A friend and I sat in front of a coal fire, a roaring coal fire in the hotel that we were living in, and saw that I was looking at the dust going out of the flames.
So that was nothing to do with science completely.
Nothing to do with science. Fred spent many days staying here in this very house. I think probably sat on the same chair as you.
Hello and welcome to my channel, Converse with Dr. Sanj. There's an old saying that you should never meet your heroes, but today I'm making an exception to break that rule with my special guest. He needs no introduction. He's a prominent and well-known scientist and astrobiologist. So without further ado, Professor Chandra Wickramasinghe.
Very nice to be here. And what can I say?
I'm delighted to welcome you to my channel. So I guess we can go, to begin with, we can go back to your time in Sri Lanka. So we can start with the time in University of Ceylon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll go back a little further back in time. I was born in 1939 to this island of Sri Lanka. It was Ceylon then, and it was part of the great British Empire. My early childhood, from the age of 0 to about 10, was a very privileged childhood because my father was a distinguished mathematician, a scholar of considerable repute in the island and also abroad, and he was an Indian civil servant. He passed into what is called the ICS, which was a very prestigious position to have for Sri Lankans in those days. So he worked a bit in India. He was fed up with India in the 1930s and the early 1940s because India was clamoring for independence. So the security that Winston Churchill thought that the empire had was really crumbling. And so he wasn't very happy, and he came back to Ceylon and married my mother. And so that's where I started my early life. I spent the first 10 years or so mostly in Ceylon. But in 1945, my father had an assignment in London for a year and a half, nearly 2 years. And myself and my younger brother and my mother, we all moved to London, to Hampstead, apartment in Hampstead. So we spent about a year and a half, and that was my first experience of England. It was post-war England. The war had just finished. There was rations and so on. And it was not an easy time to be in London. But so I really enjoyed it in part. I did enjoy it. And my father took me to Cambridge, where his alma mater was Cambridge University. He showed me all the colleges and so on. And right from that moment, I thought, when I saw the sights of Trinity College, Cambridge, I said to myself, I must come here someday. And I was just a child of 10, 11 at the time. So they went back to Ceylon, and my education again was rather privileged. I was at Royal College, Colombo, which was a very, I think, the poshest school in the island at the time. It was a school that was intended for sort of British colonists in the early days. And so this is where I essentially learned all my early education was there. I learned Latin, Greek. I was not very good at Latin, but I loved Greek. And I also loved Greek culture. I loved physics and I loved mathematics. And so that was the beginning of my school life in the 1950s. In 1955, there was an iconic event in Sri Lanka, which was a total solar eclipse, total eclipse of the sun, where the moon came in front of the sun's disk and there was total darkness. Eclipses happen very frequently, of course, but to have it in a particular land area is relatively rare, and I don't think Sri Lanka has had an eclipse for a very, very long time. So this was an eclipse that was highlighted in the newspapers, a lot of anticipation. Teams of scientists were due to come from America, from England, from Japan, and so on, and to make various measurements to do with astronomy. And I think that was the point at which I really got clued up and interested in astronomy. And I was very good in my maths and physics. And so this was a natural aspiration to begin in the mid-1950s. Of course, I then finished my schooling and I went to University of Ceylon. It was then, there's only one university in Colombo, and studied mathematics for a mathematics honors degree, which I got. And then I did rather well in that, and I was awarded a British Commonwealth Scholarship.
So on that point, I would like to ask you, so you received a degree from University of Ceylon, and then you decided to move to the University of Cambridge here in the UK. So can I ask what motivated you in making that decision?
Yeah, that was also a very personal family connection that was involved there. Because, as I told you, my father was an accomplished mathematician and scholar. He went to Trinity College, Cambridge in the 1930s. He was taught by really great figures. G.H. Hardy, who taught Ramanujan also, and then Sir Arthur Eddington, who was an astronomer, who was a very famous astronomer, and he was the person who essentially showed that Einstein's theory of relativity was correct. One of the Einstein's theory predictions was that during an eclipse, if you look at a star that is very close to the limb of the sun, its path will be bent. The light will be bent because it's passing by a very big object like the sun. So there was a team led by Arthur Eddington who went to an eclipse. This is before the Sri Lankan eclipse. It was an eclipse that's visible in South Africa. And so he went on this, and I think my father was his pupil at the time. He was hoping to go on this eclipse with him, but as it turned out, he decided he had to get a job. He sat for the ICS, Indian Civil Service, and he scooted off to India. So he didn't do that, but there was this tradition of astronomy books in the house that I grew up in. So I think for me it was more or less natural to think of astronomy as a career after I finished my mathematics degree.
Am I right saying that astronomy was the real motivation for you to come to here in UK?
Yeah, that's certainly true. That was my ambition from the mid-1950s. I said, I'm really so interested in all this stuff, and I was good in maths and good in physics and so on. And I said, someday I would like to know more about the stars and about the universe, and this became an obsession. So when I got my first class honors degree in maths and Commonwealth Scholarship, the question was, what are you going to do in Cambridge? So I applied to my father's old college, which was Trinity College, the poshest college in Cambridge, of course, and I was admitted to as a Commonwealth Scholar to Trinity College, Cambridge. So that's where it started. I arrived in the 1960s, late 1960s, early 1970s. And another stroke of luck was that the astronomy graduate committee said that your supervisor is going to be Fred Hoyle.
Sir Fred Hoyle.
Yeah, the Fred Hoyle, the legendary Fred Hoyle of the time. He was again at that time in the 1960s. He was the iconic astronomer in the world, and so I became his student, and that's where it all started.
Very good, fascinating. So if I now try and travel a little bit to 70s, I gather 1974 was a very special year for you. So with late Sir Fred Hoyle, so you proposed the theory that some of the dust in stellar,
Interstellar space.
yes, is largely organic.
That's right. I mean, this was a paper that I published on my own, in fact, in Nature in 1974, saying organic dust grains in interstellar space. And I gave arguments, powerful arguments for why this has to be true. But I think you've got to step back a couple of years before the 1974, because my whole career from the time I went to Cambridge was to try to unravel, to understand what the dust in space was made of. Right? If you look at the night sky on a dark night, you see the sort of Milky Way band of stars stretching from horizon to horizon. You can see that if there's a clear, cloudless night, right? And in between those stars, you have huge dark patches, dark areas that look like, some of them look like elephant's trunks, some of them look like coal sacks and so on. And these are the gigantic clouds of interstellar dust. So when I started my PhD in Cambridge in 1962, the general belief was that this dust was made of ice, water, like particles that you see in the clouds in the atmosphere, cumulus clouds in the atmosphere, are full of microscopic particles of water ice, right? So the general view in astronomy at the time, and it was a view that was held for 20 years or so before me, was that this was ice, and that was a done deal. Everyone said, no, we don't need to know anything more about this. These dark patches in the Milky Way, they're made of little trillions and trillions of ice crystals. Right? Now, I decided to look at this problem again with the guidance of the late Sir Fred Hoyle. And I should maybe tell you this story, because Fred and I we started working on problems not connected directly with the dust to begin with, on other problems, and I became very close to him as a mentor and a friend. And we shared a lot of interests. He was deeply interested in English literature, which I also was interested in, particularly in poetry in the Romantic period. And so he used to go to the Lake District regularly on walking trips. So he said, how about you coming with me on my next tour of the Lake District in 1961? And I said, lovely, I'd love to do that. And so on that first trip to the Lake District, amid the walking in the daytime, Fred and I sat in front of a coal fire, a roaring coal fire in the hotel that we were living in, and saw that I was looking at the dust going out of the flames. And I remarked to Fred Hoyle, what if the dust in interstellar space is like the dust that is being formed in the flames of this coal fire? Right? He was dumbfounded for a bit, and then he gave it a lot of thought, and he said, maybe Chandra, maybe you're right. Let's go for trying to explore that. So we then spent the next two years or so on modeling carbon as the main constituent of the interstellar dust. So the carbon started off being like the soot that came from the fire, but over a period of nearly 10 years, we refined, we did much more research on it. And then, as you said, in 1974, I published a paper in Nature saying the dust grains were complex organic polymers. Now, at that point, there was no mention of how those organic polymers were formed. Then in 1974-75, we had to work out why and how are such complex organics making up essentially 10% of the mass of the entire galaxy. And the question arose, why not biology? We see organic material all over the planet here on the ground. You scoop up, you will find that a large fraction of that stuff is organic, right? And that organic material is derived from bacteria, from life. So why not the same in space, in the universe? So that's what we worked on. And after publishing the 1975 paper in Nature, We then looked at the possibility that we could really show that there was a signature of a bacterium in cosmic dust. Now, how can we do that? We have to go to the big telescopes and tell the guys who are organizing these telescopes and assigning time on the telescope that we want to do that. We tried to do that in the UK, and the guys in the UK said, no, this is a waste of time, we won't do that. Then we tried the United States, nothing much happened. Then it turned out, and this is where my family connection comes. I had, apart from myself in the family, there were 3 others in my family, right? The guy just younger to me was trained as a medical professor. He became professor at St. Mary's Hospital in London, and world's leading expert in a disease called myeloma. Unfortunately, he succumbed to the same disease. He died before he was 70. Right? So that was Sunita, my younger, 2 years younger than me. But in terms of my story, the youngest still was another 4 years younger than him, was Dal Wickramasinghe, who I think in his youth, in his younger years, he was inspired by not only by my father, but by me as well, because I was heading towards astronomy. He became an astronomer himself. He got a PhD in astronomy in Cambridge, and he ended up as professor at the University of Australian National University in Canberra. And he had access, Dal, my younger brother Dal, had access to the then biggest optical telescope in the world, the Anglo-Australian telescope. So we turned to Dal, and Dal was visiting this house many, many times. When Fred was also visiting, Fred spent many, many days staying here in this very house. I think probably sat on the same chair as you. And so Dal was here, and we asked, and Fred asked Dal, is there anything you can do on the telescope to show that the dust in space is similar to bacteria, or is indistinguishable from bacteria? And of course he said, yeah, I'll go and think about it. And within a 6-month period, he and a colleague, a young man called David Allen, devised an experiment, a spectroscopic experiment, to verify that the huge column of dust between the Earth and the center of the galaxy is material that you cannot really distinguish from bacteria, right? And he did that experiment, and the results were just stunning, right? The match was 100% with the bacterial, the desiccated, dried out bacterial spectrum. So, I mean, that was it. I think we thought that this was a final proof of the theory that the dust in space was bacteria.
You started exploring or looking at other disciplines like astrobiology?
Yeah, when I started, before that in time, I started essentially as a poet. I thought at the age of 15, 16, I thought I would really like to be a poet. I published a book of short poems in the haiku style whilst I was a student in schoolboy in Sri Lanka, in fact. And from several books recently, I think this is one of them. Do I need to show it or not really?
We could do later.
Okay. I mean, one of the books that I wrote earlier had one poem that sort of summarizes my career in a way. It says, amidst a million stars, I stand alone and wonder how much life and love there was tonight. There's a haiku style,
Japanese
haiku style poems, and I've written loads of poems. So I thought at one point that I was going to be a poet rather than a scientist, and I decided against being a poet. But I also wrote poetry whilst I was in Cambridge, and I won a very prestigious prize at Trinity College called the Powell Prize for an original English poem. And I beat all the guys who were English scholars and so on.
So that was nothing to do with science completely.
Nothing to do with science. But science sort of had its entry into many of my poems that I talked about.
So they are related.
They're not related, but I mean, I think you cannot separate one area of human activity and another, isn't it? They all interlink.
Agreed.
I reckon my obsession with the life in the universe is probably connected with my early childhood and interest in
Curiosity.
Yeah.
So, being a astrobiologist as well as also, I gather you are chemist.
Well, I don't know. Well, I don't know how I describe myself, but there is no doubt whatsoever, right? And this I'm not speaking out of false arrogance, that the subject astrobiology was invented by me and Fred Hoyle, right? In the 1970s, when we were finding all this evidence for life everywhere and so on, we said that either astronomy is going to be taken over by biology or vice versa. And then Fred Hoyle and I mean, Fred Hoyle visited this house regularly. Yes. He sat exactly where you're sitting now.
I see, okay.
Right? And we said, what should this subject be called? Microorganisms everywhere was what we had discovered at the time. The first choice that we had was cosmicrobia, right? Cosmic microbes, cosmicrobia. I think we should have stuck with that in retrospect. Now, I think, and I've written a paper recently saying that we should really revert from astrobiology to cosmicrobia. So, but yes, we did. There was no link at all that was appreciated in science between biology and astronomy to the extent that we discovered, right? They were intimately, inextricably linked. There were some areas in science, like what was being pursued by my Sri Lankan colleague, Panspermia, where they're trying to find evidence for early chemistry that might have led to the beginnings of life, right? So there were labs in the United States, there were Aussies thought in various other places that were looking for what is it called? Evolution of the chemical evolution of life. That was an obsession, but there was no astrobiology, so we started that. We don't get credit for that. We wrote papers and so on. There's no doubt that the priority rests with us, right? But it has been stolen from us in a very, very distinctly, I think, almost reprehensible way. We founded here in Cardiff the first ever World Centre for Astrobiology, right? And it was from 1990s to 2000, and then the university decided to close it because it was not attracting enough money from governmental sources, so it was closed. And the history of that institute, I've got students who survived that, graduate students who are around now, who are my students. So this produced students in astrobiology, graduates and PhDs in astrobiology and so on, but it was closed, and it was taken up in the United States in a big way. But no one ever cites the first origin, which is unquestionably, in terms of the facts, priority belongs to us. So that's the way things go. I mean,
yeah.
I think there are highway robbers all everywhere.
So the term astrobiology, was it also coined by you?
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah, it was a choice between astrobiology and cosmicrobia, and cosmicrobia lost out, and I think we should revert to cosmicrobia because let our enemies take over the astrobiology because they're fooling around. They're not doing the right astrobiology, in my view, and so that's the present situation. But in Sri Lanka, the astrobiology was also an interesting development that took place because in 1917 1989, we used to visit Sri Lanka regularly. It was with the family and so on.
Was it 1970s?
70s, late 70s.
Late 70s.
And on one of my visits, I think there were newspaper headlines saying Chandra Wickramasinghe says there's life in comets and so on, and the headlines there. So these headlines were noticed and taken note of by the then president of Sri Lanka, who was President J.R. Jayawardena.
Yes.
And J.R. Jayawardena happened to be one of my father's school friends. He was in school with. So I have a call from President's office and on our home phone saying the President would like, His Excellency would like to see you. So I go to His Excellency's house in the Queen's house or wherever it's called. And he says, Chandra, I've just come back from a tour of India, and I've been to so many different scientific institutions doing high-level science. Why can't we have an institution like that, right? So I give you the chance to start such an institution. So that's the way the IFS started. I've got cuttings. I've got a scrapbook of cuttings.
Oh, I see.
So there's again the priority for starting the IFS is between Jayawardena and me, right? Other people are now taking it over. Ponambirum amongst others. Now, so what happened was that I then had to swap my time between Cambridge and Cardiff and Sri Lanka and so on.
Traveling back and forth
twice a year, and I was the appointed director of the Institute of Fundamental Studies, and I think I did a great job there.
Last year, I can see a photo over there. Last year, you received your MBE from the King. That was a great honor.
Well, I don't know. I think I should go.
If you could show it to our viewers. Oh, this is good.
Yeah. If you can take a picture of that, isn't it?
Yeah.
That was interesting. I mean, I didn't want to refuse it. I had reasons, but that I might have refused it. But I thought it was ungracious to. I mean, I've spent my whole life working in an imperial context. So if the Empire wants to give me a silly medal, then I think to take it wasn't a big deal.
I think it's a very significant thing. I think it is. For your contribution to science, I think it's a great reflection of your contribution and your career, your work. That's very significant thing.
Yeah, I don't really know. I think it was interesting to go to Windsor Castle and see the interior of Windsor Castle and to be hosted by His Majesty. But I was also, honoured by the President of Sri Lanka, and it was Premadas at the time, who conferred me the highest national honour for science, Vidya Jyoti.
Vidya Jyoti, that's very decorative thing. Yeah, before your name. So talking about your personal life a little bit, do you want to talk about your family?
Yeah, well, I think a turning point in my family. I didn't really should comment. Well, I grew up in a very sort of closeted family situation. My father, as I said already, was a mathematician in his youth. He got the highest honours in mathematics. He had connections, letters. I've got letters from Sir Arthur Eddington saying that he was one of his most brilliant students and so on. So, in a sense, my mission in astronomy was to pick up from where my father left, because he never achieved what he really wanted to achieve, which was to become a mathematician and an astronomer. So to that extent, I was connected with the family history of mathematics in the family. When my mother was essentially a homemaker, she was very devoted to my father, to her children, and she brought up 4 boys. So it couldn't have been very easy, as you know. all her four boys, my mother's four boys, turned out to be scientists, and quite distinguished scientists, right?
What about your wife, your children?
Yeah, the wife was a great supporter of all my. She had to live through all this aggravation of hatred and racism and so on. I remember when we came to Cambridge, when we came to college. Cambridge was nice. It was pleasant. People were I think, civilized there. Whereas here, there was a lot of jealousy. I was the youngest professor that they had appointed here in Cardiff ever. And I was appointed to a department, to head a department that had people in their 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
So there was great resentment to have a man in his 30s telling them what to do. So it wasn't an easy job for me at the start. But the guy, the head of this college, it was then University College, Cardiff.
I see.
It hadn't become Cardiff University at the time. He said, you have to start, Chandra, start astronomy here, get Fred Hoyle. So we appointed Fred Hoyle honorary professor, and he gave a lot of money for appointing young lecturers and research fellows and so on.
So that was at University of Cardiff?
It was called Cardiff, University College Cardiff.
I see.
Right? So I had about 15, 20 years of lavish support from the institution here.
Yeah.
And this city became the hub of astronomy.
Oh, I see.
For a good decade. You had Fred Hoyle coming here. We had Nobel laureates, Willie Fowler, spending the summers here, Phil Solomon from Columbia, and so on. So it was unquestionably the place to be in the summer months because they all came here. But then the head of the university ran into financial trouble.
Yeah, of course.
as often happens when you behave like that, spending a lot of money. So he was chucked out.
Oh, I see.
And then another guy was appointed. The other guy was also fairly well disposed to be, but not that well disposed towards this operation that was bringing a lot of fame, but not much money. And so eventually the outfit was sort of closed in a sense. And I was just a professor in a big department. And then another vice chancellor came and said that maybe we should start a center for astrobiology. So the first ever center for astrobiology was started in 2000. And in 10 years, it was closed, unceremoniously closed, because we didn't attract enough money.
But you had a good 10 years of run.
Maybe 8 years of
8 years, okay, yeah. But apart from that, you were in other words, you founded the center.
It was the only center, the first ever center. I was the director of the center.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So for my young viewers, especially, I wanted to ask you this question. How has the mathematics shaped your career? How has it helped you? The role of mathematics?
I think as my degree in mathematics was very useful. In Colombo, it was a maths honours degree that I did.
See. Yeah.
In Colombo University. It was the University of Ceylon.
Yeah.
And I was taught there by quite distinguished people at the time. Michael Eliezer, who was a friend of Fred Hoyle's. He was a fellow of a college in Cambridge as well. So he and I had a good relationship. And then there was a physicist called Miles Wagener, Professor Miles Wagener, who also had they were all very keen on me because they thought that I was a high flyer, and so they invited me and gave me lots of privileges. But mathematics was important because I think maths was the tool for exploring the universe as I saw it. I mean, chemistry also was important, and I didn't know much chemistry, so I had to learn chemistry on the job. I didn't know much biology, so I had to learn the biology on the job. But those are easy to learn. They're factual. But training in rigorous mathematical arguments, that I think has an advantage in any scientific activity that one could think of, isn't it?
Yeah, indeed.
So it kept me in good stead, and I don't regret having having started off in mathematics. And in fact, my father also started off he did in mathematics degree at the University of London, and he went to Cambridge and did the mathematical tripods at Trinity College. So I think maths is important as a key subject of technical discipline.
It is. So we have come to the end of our conversation. It has been an honor to meet, I would say, my childhood hero. So, like I said at the beginning, my dream has come true. Before we wrap up, Professor, would you like to add anything?
I think what I would like to add is that if you have a mission in your life and a passion to pursue some intellectual activity, I think you should go ahead with that. I think there is a drive in every one of us to find some niche in which we can contribute to knowledge and to experience in this area of academic discipline. So I think that's what I would say.
Those are very wise words. With that, we are concluding our conversation. So thank you very much for truly inspiring, not just myself, but many generations. So it was, like I said, honor to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.